the Mario murder that Nintendo covered up. That's, a bit of a loaded statement, right? The world of Mario is often viewed as sort of a peaceful one. Sure, there's conflict, and full-blown war machines prowling through certain parts of the land, but generally speaking, the lands featured in Mario games are pretty peaceful. Pleasant, even. So the concept of a murder within a game is a bit odd. Now, obviously, death takes place all around us. Mario is a harbinger of destruction, and he is always destroying hordes of foes in the process. But to think of a deliberate murder, like someone getting stabbed with a knife and bleeding out, that's not very Mario-like. It's the opposite of the chipper world that Nintendo has always put in front of our faces. But today, we're going to talk about such an incident that was eventually covered up. So, I hope you enjoy this odd look at a crime swept under the rug. And if you like watching strange Mario videos, hey, I'm your dude. Subscribe for more videos just like this one, and I'll keep them coming. Now, in order to set the stage for this event, I think we first need to define death in Mario games. I mean that seriously too. Death is a very loose concept in games like Super Mario, because it never feels risky. Obviously, if we jump into a pool of lava in real life, we're going to burst into flames as our body is slowly reduced to smoldering ashes, and we eventually become part of the lava itself. A pleasant concept, if I must say so myself. But when we're Mario, we fall in lava all the time. We don't catch on fire and evaporate in burning agony. We burn our butt, or we flip upside down and just go, well, I guess I'll die now. It's comical. It makes death feel like it isn't risky at all. If Mario gets crushed by a thwomp or a boulder, he isn't reduced to a bloody smear on the ground. He springs back to life like some sort of time sage, who can roll back the destruction on his body to before it was completely defiled. All these things make death feel less final than it is. Throw in the fact that we can respawn over and over, and death almost just seems like a brief period of time before we're alive again. It's no longer the end-all be-all. It's a quick transition to a new perfect Mario. And yeah, that's overthinking things. But it's important to understand how death is typically treated in these games. When we die, everything we killed generally comes back to life too. We rise again, like the tarnished that we are, clutching for that Elden Ring, only to be beat down again by a rat. And although Mario has the capability of respawning, we do know that death is sometimes a permanent state for others. After all, there are plenty of ghosts of characters that have passed on. Characters that haunt areas in the game and do not share the same rebirth cycle as Mario. Heck, even Bowser has been reduced to bones before, only to come back completely fine. The inconsistency is truly the magic of Mario. Switching gears for a second, now when Nintendo releases games, they don't always do a thorough pass on round one. Sometimes there are things in games that are later fixed in future versions. Not too long ago, I covered the concept of a time stop glitch in Super Mario 64 that only existed in the Japanese version. By the time the English version came out, the issue was fixed. They were able to address this exploit by experiencing it not long after the original version released. So those of us who speak English never even knew it was a thing back then. Modern games can obviously patch stuff on the fly with automatic game updates, so things can get fixed rather quickly too. But it's a combination of these three things that set the stage perfectly for what I'm going to talk about next. The portrayal of death in Mario games, the positive, chipper environments of those same games, and Nintendo's ability to fix past issues. Because even though Mario's brand guidelines are more defined than they were in the 80s and 90s, there were still some outliers. Some games that pushed the boundaries a bit more than others, and Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door was one of those games. I don't think I say this alone. We collectively love The Thousand-Year Door, and after this game, the fanbase for Paper Mario basically became divided. You had those who kind of liked Super Paper Mario, and those who wanted to burn it at the stake. I kid of course. I know some people genuinely like the newer format of the games, but I'll always be a sucker for the original too. However, I think what I loved about Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door was the roughness of the town of Rougeport. It felt a lot different than what I had experienced before in Mario games. The overall sense about the town was that it wasn't safe. It was a poorer town where people did what they had to do to get by. Built upon the ruins of the old city, it's just something that sort of evolved here. And of course, it attracted all sorts of shady figures, hence the name Rougeport. It was the East versus the West. You had the Robo Thieves who ruled the East side, and the Pianta Syndicate who governed the West. Basically the Pianta Mafia. And they didn't like each other. Not even 15 minutes into the game, and you can already see the Robos getting jumped and beat up in the streets. It's a hella hostile environment, but that's what makes it so cool. Mario Gang Wars? Sign me up. So it goes without saying that this environment was a bit testy when it came to the squeaky clean nature of Mario. How do you handle all these very real violent problems that happen in real life without stepping over into territory that makes your brand not so kid-friendly? Well, honestly, they handled it very well, except for one incident, that is. So there's this bandit that you encounter in the game called Larson. and as his name implies, he's a questionable fellow. We eventually can get a side quest from the Trouble Center, where he's committed credit card fraud and we need to track him down. He runs all around Rougeport, but we can actually locate his hideout in the back of Rogueport's main square. This house is completely wrecked on the inside. There's bags of trash, papers thrown all about, flies and cockroaches, and just junk littered everywhere. It's gross, and probably smells like something crawled up in there and died. Oh wait, that's because something actually did. The problem is that none of us can see it. So this house actually used to contain something else besides what we see here. It used to be a crime scene. The body of a toad was found here at one point. In crime scene fashion, this toad's body was outlined on the floor and the room had blood all over the ground. Truly something grim, but also really out of place for a Mario game if you think about it. I don't think I've ever seen blood before in a Mario game. The idea of a toad getting stabbed to death in this abandoned building is totally on par with Rogueport's theme, but man, it's definitely an outlier in terms of what we're used to. The fact that a bandit is casually standing in this house on the blood-soaked floor is pretty ruthless too. So we know a toad got murdered, and some sort of police figure obviously chalked out the body. But it's weird because this place should rightfully be condemned and labeled as a crime scene, but it isn't. And while that is of course strange, there is the bigger mystery at hand, and that's how this crime scene disappeared. Because I know those of us who played the English version of this game never experienced this crime scene. The house was covered in trash and not blood. So what happened? Well, apparently, the only version of the game that contains the dead toad is the Japanese version of the game, and there's a story that goes along with it. Back in 2004, Bill Trinan and Nate Bildorf had an interview for Nintendo Treehouse. This was logged on Nintendo World Report, and in this interview they talked about the localization of games. It's interesting because localization is a long back and forth process that takes place while the game itself is often being written. So they constantly have to double check the context of jokes and make sure everything is good for an English-based audience. And that's where this toad incident is openly discussed. Surprisingly, it wasn't anything about the scene being an outlier in terms of a Mario game's theme. It was essentially that they feared the chalk outline and blood on the floor would sway the ESRB rating for the game. It would be a gamble if such elements would push the game from an E rating to a T rating. And apparently, that brings about lots of drawbacks. For one, they can't advertise the game in certain places. The interview states that certain advertising outlets require special ratings, and they essentially have to buy the advertising slots ahead of time. If they get hit with a T rating, their investment is basically lost, since they are then barred from advertising in places they already purchased. Bill Trinan goes on to say, quote, "It's not so much, we're Nintendo, we make kiddie games. It's that, A, we're Nintendo, and we make games that we think will appeal to all ages. And B, because they appeal to all ages, we want to be able to market to all ages. And then it's important to get that E rating." End quote. So, changes were made to the game to preserve localization game ratings outside of Japan. And the death of the mysterious toad, who bled all over the gross house, was swept under the rug. I guess one dead toad on the XS Express was enough for Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door. Ghost T never mentions how they died though, so perhaps they were a second toad murder as well on the train. But, all in all, that's how Nintendo covered up a Mario murder. I hope you enjoyed this tale, subscribe if you did, and I'll see you all soon in the next video. Cheers!